Hello, my name is Mustapha.
And my name is Jesse.
And this is the Bachelors Podcast. So this week we're going to be doing our, what is now going to be our regular style of podcast. We're going to be doing 2 to 3 topics that are in the current news. And then we're going to do a session with quick notes at the end where it's just like little topics that we kind of wanted to talk about but didn't exactly warrant being one of our 2 to 3 topics. This week we're going to talk about the Trans Mountain Pipeline running from Alberta to BC. And then we are going to talk about the Colten Boushie trial and murder and so on. And then we're going to do the quick notes after that. So stay tuned for that. And first we're going to talk about the pipeline. So Jesse, you want to take it away?
All right, so up first is the Trans Mountain Pipeline trying to be built by Kinder Morgan. If built, this will be between Alberta and British Columbia. Of course, Alberta, their economy is essentially based off of the oil sands there. And this, other than the domestic use of their oil, they obviously need to export it around the world. And for those of you familiar with Canadian geography, obviously know that Alberta is landlocked. So that is harder to do without the help of the provinces on the coast, namely British Columbia. So what this pipeline will do is it'll take the oil from the oil sands, transport it across land to BC, especially the Vancouver Harbor, which is the most active in Canada, and that is their outlet to get their oil exported around the world. Now, the problem with this, of course, is if BC doesn't want this to happen, it can put up a number of roadblocks, which it looks like it will. And we'll get into that a little bit later on whether they can or cannot do that. But for now, the pipeline is in limbo, and we don't quite know what's going to happen.
We get a trade war, right? So if you guys are not familiar, both British Columbia and Alberta currently have a NDP government. In BC, it is a coalition government, kind of, with the Green Party holding the balance of power. But it's kind of a strange situation where you have a trade war going on between 2 provinces that are both technically part of like the same party. Obviously provincial parties are a little bit different, but they're both like connected to the same federal party. They both have similar like founding ideologies. And you have BC saying, okay, well, we got to prioritize environmentalism and we want to protect the harbor. We want to protect the mountains. There's indigenous issues that come up with this pipeline. And you have Alberta being like, okay, we need jobs. Our economy is not doing very well right now because oil prices have fallen and so on. And so Rachel Notley, the premier of Alberta, is just being like, we need this pipeline. Justin Trudeau has endorsed the pipeline, has approved the pipeline, it has federal approval because it does go over provincial borders. And because BC is trying to put up the roadblocks, Alberta said that they're no longer going to import BC wine.
Yeah, apparently that's a big commodity in Alberta. I don't know if BC's too happy about that. But, yeah, the trade war, Again, the trade war, it's a bit of a hyperbole. It's not quite there yet. I don't think it will get to the point where we should be calling it a war.
I don't know. I feel like this is the best trade war ever in Canada. We're fighting oil and wine. Like I'm pretty entertained, but it's like, how's it going to end, Jesse?
I mean, it's going to end when BC either Canada, the federal state of Canada says enough bickering between you two and it puts their foot down, or BC just accepts that eventually it will run out of space and it will be forced to give in. As you said, I mean, the fact that it goes across provincial borders and that essentially just the fact that the federal government says that this pipeline is a federal matter and it's important to Canada as a whole, that's really all that needs to be said for this to be a federal prerogative. And if it is a federal prerogative, then BC can't really do anything to stop it. It can implement different conditions, certain legislation to preserve the safety of the environment. Obviously, that's important. As you said, it's an NDP government, but it's backed by the Green Party, so that's the environment's obviously a big thing to BC right now, but they can't stop it. All they can do is ensure by way of certain provisions that it follows.
So you don't
codes.
think there's any chance that BC wins this?
I mean, not at all. I mean, they don't have the Constitution on their side. Mm-hmm. You could argue they have the moral high ground, but what's more of the moral high ground? Protecting the environment, which I'm not saying is not important, but protecting the environment or ensuring that our economy is operating at its highest that it can.
I don't know, because I feel like BC has a chance to win this. Here's my thing, right? It's like, Alberta, sure, they can make it like a constitutional challenge and say that they do not have like the jurisdiction to be implementing rules that prohibit a pipeline and make it too hard.
To be fair, that's all they need to do.
That's all they need to do, right? But I do think that the federal government, I don't think the federal government is going to take that strong steps. And Alberta is going to put up the fight until the end. But I think that the federal government has to care more about BC's side. Not because they don't care about Alberta, not because there isn't votes in Alberta that they need, but because they need more votes in BC, and because the environmentalist votes and people that genuinely care about the environment do vote Liberal very frequently, right? And those are not exactly votes that they want to get rid of, especially when Indigenous issues are part of this whole conversation. Am I on BC's side? No. I think the pipeline should be built. This one in particular, I don't think all pipelines should be built. I think this one should. I'm just saying, I don't think it's so cut and dry to say this is going to end and BC is going to lose and there's going to be a pipeline running through Vancouver.
Well, I do think it is cut and dry, not just because of the Constitution side, but you brought up the fact that votes are important, which is why Trudeau and the federal government should be looking to manage both sides. And obviously they're going to try to be a mediator before they are attacking one side or the other. That's obvious. But talking about votes, a majority of Canada agrees that the pipeline in general, not necessarily the specific one, but adding pipelines is in the best interest of Canada. And they know that, this Trudeau said at the start, obviously he preached a lot about environmentalism. Not a lot of that has been done throughout his tenure. But one of the things he said is he would support pipelines as long as there were certain measures taken to provide environmental support and help. And the thing that he got from Notley in the Alberta government was that they put forth the carbon tax. So that was kind of the trade-off. Now, whether or not that's a good trade-off is one thing, but that was apparently enough for Trudeau to say, okay, that ticks off my environmental box. That makes sure the people that supported me know I'm doing what needs to be done. And he allowed them to go through with it.
The carbon tax is federally mandated, first off.
Yes.
Everyone has to have a carbon tax. Ontario, the PC party leaders are trying to fight over the fact that they're not going to implement a carbon tax, but they have to. But it's the thing is, when I really don't like the fact that Trudeau has used the marine conservation money that he's promised Vancouver as a bargaining chip, because obviously the federal spending power is a thing, right? And he has promised, I don't know, it was a lot of money. I think it was $1.4 billion to the Vancouver Harbor area for marine conservation, which is a lot of money. But it's I feel like that's the worst bargaining chip, because that is such a nice way to spend money. The Vancouver Harbor is a beautiful place right now, but it's when that marine conservation money comes in, it makes that harbor just a little bit nicer.
Well,
and it's
at least
especially it's very important if you're going to have a pipeline that even if there is no major spill, there's definitely going to be impact of having tons more oil tankers coming in and out, right? A spill doesn't mean that there's not going to be any oil in the water. There's definitely going to be oil in the water. Oh, for sure. No matter what.
And with the ship options and the cargo options that they have available to them are most likely going to mean a spill is however many times worse, exponentially worse than the ones we've seen in the past. But obviously that is the big issue. BC isn't just being a dick to be a dick. They want the environment to come first, at least in this instance. I can't think of any other reason. Sure, you have the indigenous side to it, but realistically, as unfortunate as it sounds, I don't think that's enough to sway much anymore. And that's not to say that it should or shouldn't, but in this case, I don't think that's going to be a big part. I think it does come down to the fact that the Green Party is really pushing for environmental protection. Kinder Morgan themselves said that despite the chances of it happening or being very low, a spill with this new pipeline and the amount that they're going to be transporting is going to be, I think it was tenfold what we experienced before in 2015 off the coast of Vancouver. Obviously there is potential for major damage, but I don't think that can be. I don't think that is enough to say we're not going to do the pipeline.
I don't know. I guess we're going to see. Okay, so in August of 2016, Colten Boushie and a group of his friends were driving around Saskatchewan. They pull into the yard of Gerald Stanley's farm, and as Gerald Stanley and his family were outside doing their thing, his wife was mowing the lawn, him and his son were I don't even remember. They had seen this car drive up into their driveway. 2 or 3 people jumped out, were climbed into Gerald Stanley's van, and were attempting to steal their ATV. Gerald Stanley responded by calling over to his son, saying, "You get the gun, go inside." And Gerald Stanley approached the car. The men who were the kids, I guess, I don't even know how old they are, but Colten Boushie's friends who were trying to steal the ATV ran off. They fled the scene. And Gerald Stanley approached the car. Colten Boushie had been sitting in the back seat with his girlfriend sleeping on his lap, and he, during the whole panic of the thing, he jumped into the front seat to try and drive away. As he was doing this, Gerald Stanley came up to the car, and as Colten Boushie was looking over his shoulder at his sleeping girlfriend, he was shot in the head by Gerald Stanley. This occurred in Saskatchewan. Gerald Stanley is a white farmer, and Colten Boushie was a First Nations man. He died, of course. He was murdered. When the RCMP showed up to Colten Boushie's house, they knocked on the door and they spoke to his mother. When his mother opened the door, they said, "Are you Colten Boushie's mother?" She said, "Yes." And they said, "Your son is deceased." They then walked into their house, kind of rummaged through all of their stuff to try to find some evidence of something, with no real care about the fact that they had just told a mother that her son had died. They then asked Colten Boushie's mother if she was drunk because she was upset and she was crying. They then smelt the breath of Colten Boushie's mother and Colten Boushie's family members, his siblings, and they were saying, "No, we're not drinking. We're just waiting for Colten to come home. We have his dinner in the microwave. Why is he not here? What happened?" And the police simply responded with just claiming that they were drunk, that they were, I guess, drunk Indians is what it seems like the stereotype that they were following was. And it just seems like a mess. So that's what happened. Those are the incidents that happened that time ago. There's one correction I'd like to make, though, is you said he was murdered, and apparently that is not the case, because we recently had the criminal trial end, and what did they find? So on last Friday, it was, I don't remember the date now, I think it was the 9th, the trial in Saskatchewan was wrapped up, and the jury verdict was that not only was it not an intentional murder, they said he was not guilty for second-degree murder, and he was acquitted
as well of manslaughter. So he
manslaughter,
has
that's what
nothing.
Completely acquitted, free to go.
Acquitted, yeah.
There's a GoFundMe up to fund for Gerald-Stanley's legal fees, which
I mean, it's not his fault. His gun killed someone.
It is probably the most disgusting thing I've heard in a very long time.
I do want to get into the more legal aspect of why second-degree murder was acquitted, why manslaughter wasn't put on the table and whatnot. But I'm sure most people are upset about how the trial, or excuse me, how the jury was decided more than the actual outcome.
I think I'm upset about all of it because I think
for sure,
I think every part of it just reeks of, first off, the absence of justice. I do not believe justice was present in this case in the slightest. I think this was a disgusting case completely. I think like reconciliation as whatever wherever we are in reconciliation right now has taken like 10 steps back because of this. This is what Trayvon Martin, Canadian version. I've heard a lot of similarities compared to like the South in the 50s, where you have an all-white jury clearing a white man of the murder of a black kid. It's very similar. It reeks completely of the lack of justice in the Canadian system, and you look at it and you say, is the system broken? I don't think so. I think it was built this way, right? Like the system consistently denies justice for Indigenous people, for people of color, and this is just another example of that. And yeah, I think there is discussions to have about the juries and preemptive challenges and stuff like that, and we're going to talk about that. But I think the first thing we need to acknowledge is the fact that the system isn't broken because it is built this way, and because this kind of stuff is not a one-off case. This happens all the time. Officers act completely with disregard to the people that they're supposed to serve. Indigenous people are mistreated by the justice system. This is not. It's not a one-off case. This is just disgusting. But yeah, let's talk about the jury selection and stuff like that.
So for those of you who aren't familiar, during the jury selection process, especially for high-profile cases, murder, second-degree murder, manslaughter, that sort of thing, both sides, the prosecution and the defense, have the ability to put forth reasons or put forth,
Okay, so let me jump in there.
Right,
so let's just keep this in. I think let's just make this natural, and I feel like jury selection is important in a justice system. Both the defense and the accused should hold some right to choose the jury that is going to either indict them or whatever, right? There should be an element of jury selection. But the problem in this case is that in Saskatchewan, in the very least, I don't know how it works everywhere, but when you make a challenge of somebody who's in the jury, you don't have to give a reason. All you have to say is, I don't want that person in the jury.
Yeah, I mean that is going back to the fact that they want guilt to be assumed not easily. They don't want biases to come into it. So if you have someone on trial for murder, they don't want a chance where potentially biased jury members are going to sway the rest of them and convict someone potentially for life for reasons that aren't necessarily of fact.
I think that's an optimistic viewpoint of the preemptive challenge, though. But the preemptive challenge exists because, if anything, it's just because, one, you want to sway it one way, right? Like, the root reason of it is, yeah, you want people who don't have bias, and you want people who aren't idiots on the jury, and you want people who are, like, if there's a mother on the jury that you know needs to do something better than be in the jury for the next 6 months, you know that there's reasons why you want people in the jury or not. But our system doesn't say that you have to tell us the reason. There's a belief that the defense or the accused, like the teams behind this, are choosing these people not to be in the jury for good reasons, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, and what you said, I mean, there are certain biases that are obvious. We don't allow certain people with certain professions to be in a jury for those exact reasons. And that's why we have challenges for cause. That's why if you, as either the prosecution or defense, believe very much that someone that's going to be a potential juror is biased one way or another, you can make that case and have them taken off. You don't need these challenges for no reason, as they're called. They really serve no purpose other than, as we're saying, swaying the jury to one side or the other, and there's a very good argument made that that is what happened in this case.
And the argument there is that the defense, Gerald-Stanley's team, targeted anyone in the jury who looked at least slightly of indigenous descent. They challenged them and they said that we don't want them in the jury. What they were left with was an all-white jury. The jury that acquitted Gerald-Stanley of the murder of Colten Boushie, which in my opinion he did commit, and I am not going to say differently, that they acquitted him of this murder because they believed him, right? It was an all-white jury saying we believe that not only did he not kill him intentionally, but we believe that he had just cause to kill him because of this property being stolen. Well, that's what it means when you're acquitting him of manslaughter. Because if you say it was accidental, like Gerald-Stanley claims, that was Gerald-Stanley's claim that it was manslaughter, right? He was saying it went off accidentally, which the RCMP says did not happen because there was no malfunction with the gun. Well,
that's the thing. They're not saying that Stanley had cause to murder him. They're basing their acquittal on the fact that despite experts coming on saying that this is very hard to believe within the context of this story, they acquitted Stanley because of the hang fire incident. In that hang fire is usually it's what happens when there's a malfunction when the trigger is pulled on a gun. So typically, of course, you pull the trigger, discharge is essentially immediate. But when hang fire happens, the trigger's pulled, nothing happens, and then usually a few seconds later, discharge occurs. So that is the main defense that Stanley used. He said that he had 2 or 3 rounds that he put into the gun before he brought it out to face off with Boushie, and he fired 2 shots. That's what he said. That's what his son says in their testimony. He fired 2 warning shots. I assume, hopefully, intending to scare them off. That did not occur, and he pulled the trigger one more time. Nothing happened, and then he proceeded to walk or run, depending on who the prosecution asked during the trial. He walked or ran towards the SUV, where, as he was reaching in to turn the SUV off, or so he says, the gun discharges and kills the victim. So that is what essentially the defense was hanging on. And I'll get to this a little bit later. I believe that this is why manslaughter wasn't put on the table, just because there was a focus on this so much on both sides of the prosecution and the defense. But yeah, that's what their defense was. And despite expert testimonial in saying that A, it's very unlikely that hang fire happened anyway, and B, even if it did, he would not have enough time to cross the yard running or walking before the hang fire discharge went off anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, so if you wanted to go over the second-degree murder aspect of it, do you think that this jury believed that he did not intend to kill the victim?
The jury believed that he didn't intend to kill him.
Now, let me put you on the spot. Do you believe, let's say, there were 6 jurors of indigenous descent, 6 jurors that were non-indigenous? We'll keep it the same. The other 6 were just completely white. Do you think that the finding would have been different?
Yes. And not because I'm not coming at this saying all 12 jurors are like raging racists who want to kill all the indigenous people in Saskatchewan. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the absence of like different cultural voices and different opinions has has the biggest difference in swaying a jury.
I mean, if nothing else, the pure optics of this is just horrendous. And if nothing else, that just the optics of any situation like this is why the peremptory challenge should be done away with. But again, it's not all optics, obviously. I wish it was just optics, but this can have very real consequences, as you were saying.
And I don't think that the preemptive challenge should be completely done away with. I think that people should have the right to selecting a jury in a way, right? We should, like, I don't want a Nazi in my trial, right?
Yeah,
there should be preemptive challenges, right?
No, that's exactly why we have challenges for cause. They're two different things.
Exactly.
You don't need a challenge installed in the justice system where you can say, I don't like you, but I don't need to tell anyone why you need to get out.
Yeah.
That's what a challenge for cause is. No one in their right mind is going to deny a challenge for cause.
For sure.
For a Nazi. You know what I mean?
There needs to be oversight to this, right?
Exactly, yeah.
While we don't want the Nazi being in the jury, I also don't want the Muslim guy kicked out of my jury because the defense thinks that the Muslim is going to side with me, right? Mm-hmm. I think that is completely unfair. So there needs to be some sort of oversight. That is the reform we need, if not only like the recognition of Indigenous people as peoples whose lives matter, which I think is something that needs to be a cultural thing as well, but it's just like there needs to be oversight to this. And do you have any other words? Because before we finish, I want to read something.
Sure, yeah. I mean, in a perfect world, it wouldn't matter who makes up the jury. I mean, I think we all hope to get to a point in society where, juries can be made up of all white, all Indigenous, all black, all Muslim. It doesn't matter, and they're going to give an unbiased approach to the trial. But that's just not how life works, at least at this point. Everyone's going to have their biases, and by no fault necessarily of their own, if you have an all-white jury, they're going to have certain biases, certain predispositions towards anything, and especially in an area in the area where this took place, there's a lot to be said about the public perception of Indigenous people, the media perception of Indigenous people. That, once they get onto the jury, it's not like they're living in a vacuum. All that stuff still exists. And I know we said it 100 times already, but the fact that there wasn't an Indigenous person in there means that they weren't getting that aspect. I mean, a jury should be representative of that area, and it clearly was not.
So I'm going to read a Facebook post from Murray Sinclair. He is a senator in Canada. He's also an Indigenous man, and he was the chair of Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the residential schools inquiry. So I'm going to read a Facebook post from him. He said, the post reads, "Today I grieve for my country. I grieve for a family that has seen only injustice from the moment a farmer with a handgun. Why does a farmer need a handgun? Killed their son. I grieve for a mother who saw the police raid her house and treat her like a criminal and not like the victim she was. I grieve for other mothers with empty arms who are reminded of their own losses at the hands of others and the lack of answers that haunt them still. I grieve for the youth who now see no hope and whose hunger for justice gives rise to anger. I grieve for the children whose lives now have one more jeopardy. I grieve for the elders who have seen this before and whose wisdom holds no means to get through this evenly. I may grieve for some time, but then again, we have been grieving for a long time. This is why we can't just get over it and move on. My country won't let me." And that's everything that I needed to say. So on a lighter note, Jesse, you got some quick notes for us?
We do. So we're going to do a bit of a back and forth here. I'm going to do one of my quick notes. Mustapha's going to come in with one of his. I'll do my second one. And then, hopefully, if he is prepared, he'll do his second one. Hopefully. So we'd like to ideally keep these under, I say, a minute 30. And we're just going to quick fire things we couldn't quite get to. Maybe the topic wasn't big enough. We just didn't think it was that big of a deal. But we still want to talk about them. So, without further ado, I'm going to start off with my first quick note, and that is about people kind. Yes, I'm sure most of you have heard about it, Justin Trudeau. So let's get into it. So, some people think that Justin Trudeau needs more of a backbone. Some people think that Justin Trudeau is too far gone in the realm of political correctness. Some people, Ben Shapiro, even called Justin Trudeau a teenage girl. Well, guess what? Last week, Trudeau showed all of them. He showed them, that he has a sense of humor. So he made a very funny remark during a Q&A town hall meeting when he corrected a young woman when she said mankind. He informed her, and I quote, "We like to say people kind, not necessarily mankind, because it's more inclusive." The only issue is that no one laughed, at least not with him. So Trudeau went on to say that we can all learn from one another. So guess what? This is what I learned from our boy JT. So first, politicians are incredibly unfunny unless we are laughing at you like we are now. Second, I'm not a huge supporter of political correctness in the first place, especially not the way that it's manifested today, but you shouldn't be joking about something that a large group of people are very passionate about when in a position of such influence and power. And third, there is something that Trudeau is worse at than being our prime minister. I would give into that great cliche about keeping your day job, but I don't think that's something any of us want at this point anyway.
I mean, I would disagree and say I definitely want Justin Trudeau to still be my prime minister.
No, you don't.
And I think that the joke was a dumb joke, but I think it was kind of funny. And it's because if you actually listen to her entire remark, it was the stupidest question I've ever heard. And I think anything that, I don't know what I would have said there, and I think any joke cleared some tension in the room. But my quick note is not that. My quick note is that the new Snapchat update is seriously underrated, and it really doesn't suck that much. And I'm speaking from my point of view, and where I'm not here to this is not a humble brag, but I have quite a few people on Snapchat. I don't care about a lot of them. I don't want to see their stories. The new Snapchat update doesn't put the order of people who posted last. I see an order that is an algorithm that's made by an algorithm where it shows me the people who I care about most at the top and the people who I talk about most. So when Jesse posts a story, it's all the way at the bottom, thank God. But, when people that I like a lot more post a story, it's on the top. And that's a joke. I do love Jesse, and I do watch all of his stories. But that's what I'm saying. I don't care about people's stories most of the time because I'm not going to look down that list on the old update when there's a couple hundred stories there. I want to see the ones that I care about most, and the new update gives me that. For that, I am grateful. The new Bitmojis are seriously creepy, though. Jesse?
So I will agree with all of that except the Bitmojis. I think those are the greatest things to
The new Bitmojis?
They're great. Anyway, I'm not
weird.
sure how I follow that up with my next quick note, so I'm just going to get into it. Tacking on to last week in our talk about due diligence and allegations, especially on the part of news outlets, there was a great opinion piece by Robin Urbach, and she was sort of confronting the widespread belief that news outlets are just putting out information without any sort of research, and that is something that I did call out a little bit as well. I believe that due diligence isn't exactly completed in a lot of these stories, but she comes out and she says that they do possibly weeks, possibly months of research. They're usually rumors long before actual official stories come out, and I'm going to give a quick quote from her piece. So I quote, "Readers often accuse those in the media of rushing to judgment on these sorts of things," speaking, of course, about the sexual assault allegations. "On that note, I'll let you in on a little media party secret. Most bombshell allegations of sexual assault are rarely bombshells in the newsroom. There were rumors about John Ghomeshi, rumors about Patrick Brown, rumors about other high-profile men whose stories may or may not ever become public." End quote. So it just goes to tell you that there is a lot more going on behind the scenes. I'm sure due diligence isn't exactly done in all instances, but in many more than the public seems to believe.
I completely agree with that. I really like that opinion piece. I think it was a good piece. Also, the whole Patrick Brown is back at it, trying to make his denials super weird, and also it's not going to work. I feel like Patrick Brown's political life is done. It'll be interesting when it goes to court. He's also doing a lot of job saying different information about the accusers, which is weird because now you can easily find out who they are because he's told you like pretty much a skeleton of everything about them. So that's weird. Anyways, my next point is that I seriously do want to talk about the Toronto serial killer, Bruce McArthur. I just don't want to talk about it on the show until we know more. There's a very, very big discussion to be had there. It's just too early for me to really say, let's talk about it. I think I wanted, knowing how many people he did kill, knowing intentions, knowing the, like, more about what is going on is very, very important, and I don't want to really have an entire discussion about it until more is known.
That will obviously be explained maybe next week, maybe the week after that, but when we do know more, we definitely want to give this another talk.
And that's it.
Thank you very much for joining us on our second episode. We look forward to hearing from you, and we look forward to coming back next week. Thank you very much.
Roll the outro. That wraps up our episode for the day. Thank you all for listening. My name is Mustapha Kamisa.
And my name is Jesse Hodson. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and now we want to hear from you.
You can hit us up on email, thebachelorspod@gmail.com, or find me on Twitter at MooseKamisa.
An episode comes out every Wednesday at 5 a.m., just in time for your commute.
Tune in then.